Thank you, Carolyn and Cheryl. I wonder how Cheryl might feel if she shared an idea with me and I said, Cheryl, that's a great idea, but it won't work with our community. As soon as I said the but, she'd know that I didn't mean that it was a great idea in the first place, because but negates what comes before. And it's an example of past either or thinking. Either it's a great idea or it's not. If instead I said to her, Cheryl, that's a great idea, and what's your thinking about how to approach our community so they view it positively? The use of and rather than but connects a great idea with the need to think about it carefully and how to help others see it in a positive manner. You see, words are not innocent. They have a major impact on thinking, on learning, on relationships, and on the kind of collaboration you're able to achieve. So what about the different impacts of these words? I'm going to give you 10 minutes in breakout rooms. If instead I said, take the next 10 minutes in your breakout rooms, the difference is, in the first, with my arms folded, I'm the voice of authority and I'm giving you that time, so I retain the power and the control. If I say take, it flips it. It's offering you a gift of choice and efficacy. So the impact of words is something we need to be meta-aware of as leaders. And finally, consider the impact if I said to myself, oh, I need to have a difficult conversation with Carolyn. That message to my brain is actually presuming that that difficulty can cause stress. I might lose my confidence, and it actually induces doubt and a negative mind frame. Oh, can I do this? And is it worth it in the end? You know, I've got more things to do in life. If instead of using the word difficult or tough or fierce, I said, I need to have an important conversation with Carolyn. And that message to my brain signals this is an important issue, therefore it's important to address. And I'm more likely to think proactively about what's at stake and why it's important, leading to a positive mind frame of, so what will I do and how will I do it? You see, when you combine a proactive mind frame with an understanding of the impact words can have, and at the same time you actively work on your art of inquiry skills, you're in a really strong position to engage in important learning conversations for success. So let's take a look at what these look like in action. Cheryl and I are going to model 2 short role plays around the same scenario. And as we do so, your invitation is to notice the language we use, the mind frames we bring to each one, and the skills we use, because you're going then to have an opportunity to move into breakout rooms and share your thinking. So in the chat, there'll be, and you can see it now if you look at your chat, you'll see 2 questions that are simply intended as scaffolds to focus your sharing. So here we go, and here's the scenario. I'm a team leader at Barringup Primary School, and Mrs. Smith, Jimmy's caregiver and grandmother, has phoned to say she has concerns about his learning again. She didn't sound happy. She never does. I've suggested she meet with me after school today. So here we go. Oh, she's coming down the corridor now. I'll just sit on one side of my desk so that I don't have to get too close to her. Now, Mrs. Smith, you say you have concerns about Jimmy's learning.
Yeah, I do. I don't think he's learning properly in this big space with so many other kids. There isn't any order and the kids just seem to...
Mrs. Smith, we have a particularly experienced teaching team in our year 3-4 studio, and I can assure you, Jimmy is learning. We have records of his learning progress.
Yeah, but how do you know? He doesn't even have one teacher anymore. So how can he learn?
Because our teachers are expert at what they do. After all, that's what they're trained for.
Are they trained to work in these open spaces?
Well, they don't need to be. They know how to work as a team. They use what they're good at to work flexibly with kids. It's a much better way to give them the learning help they need. And my own grandchild attends this school and she's learning very successfully. Rest assured, all will be well. Jimmy's doing fine. Now, I'm very curious about where you got those lovely new purple shoes. Notice I'm pausing. Take a moment to reflect. How did I listen? What skills were evidenced? What was the mind frame? And here comes the same scenario with a different way of approaching it. Mrs. Smith, Jimmy's grandmother, has phoned to say she's worried about his learning. So we've agreed to meet after school today. Mrs. Smith, come and sit beside me on the chair here. Thanks for making time to meet with me. Let's look at what we both want from this conversation. I care about Jimmy and his learning. I'd like to understand your concerns and have us work together to address them. What I want to avoid is any misunderstanding.
Well, I want to avoid that too, but I don't understand what he's learning, and I don't think he can learn in a big space with all these other kids.
So you're worried about his learning?
Yeah, he doesn't even have one teacher anymore, so how can he learn?
And then you'd like to be clearer on how Jimmy's teachers are helping him learn?
Yeah, as I said, I'm worried about what's happening.
What's most important to you? What do you most want to get out of our conversation?
I want to make sure my grandson's learning and getting some really good teaching.
So what does Jimmy think and feel about his learning and his teaching this year?
Oh, well, he likes his teacher, and being with his friends, of course. He talks a lot about making good choices to help with his learning.
So it sounds like Jimmy's pretty comfortable with learning and his teachers.
Yeah, I guess it's really me that feels uncomfortable. I don't understand all these changes today.
So what would need to happen for you to feel more comfortable about Jimmy's learning?
Well, I suppose I'd like to understand how he copes in these big spaces and how he works.
So I'm wondering if you'd like to visit our learning studio to see how it all works. We're actually scheduling over this coming term visits for parents and caregivers to visit our studios and watch how our learning and teaching operates. And we're actually developing children's abilities to be able to explain the learning that's happening and the teaching. So they're going to act as tour guides. And of course, there'll be teachers on hand to answer any questions that you might have. How would you feel about that?
Yep, yeah, that sounds good. I have been anxious about this, and I do feel better that I've talked about it. But so when will I expect to hear from you?
Today is the 13th. Week beginning the 20th, we're sending invitations out to parents, and we're hoping them to begin our the first round the following week. Is that okay?
Cool, thank you. That's great.
You're welcome. Anytime you have a concern, let us know. So, two different approaches. I can see lots of threads coming through from the chat about mind frames, attitudes, the value of partnership and collaboration and working on things together rather than coming in with a knower mindset, which I certainly did in the first one. So maybe I can connect some of these to our first slide. Thanks. Because, thank you. In the first role play, I came into it with a judgment mind frame before I even got to talk to Mrs. Smith. Here she goes again, I've heard it all before. And in the breakout room I was in, people were very honest and saying, you know, when you feel like you're dealing with the same issue and the same people all the time, it's hard to keep that open mind frame. When you come in with a judgment already made in your mind, then you're not open to learning. And therefore the conversation's not going to get to the same stage as it would if you had a different mind frame. I came into it with, as an expert, a solution finder, a knower. And that's where the solution listening is one of 4 habitual forms of listening that we need to set aside if we're really going to engage in important conversations. They're often unconscious habits that have been formed over a long time. I didn't even wait to find out what Mrs. Smith's worries were in that first one. I was basically saying, I know best and I'll tell you. I was the voice of authority. And then, to add insult to injury, I added in the piece about my granddaughter. My granddaughter's at this school and she's learning very successfully. Now, when you share a story that focuses back on you, you take the focus off the person that you're trying to listen to and you take the focus off the issue that you're trying to deal with. Sometimes when you do this by sharing, oh, I know how you feel, you know, this has happened to me too. The minute you do that, you put the focus back on yourself. So in fact, showing empathy in that way and reassurance when you're trying to learn about the issue is not helpful and it's not effective. And then of course, I used inquisitive listening because I wanted to get over the conversation and I wanted a distraction, and politicians use distraction as a strategy all the time. It's tell me what I want to know. Now, Cheryl, tell me where you got those lovely purple shoes from. So when we go into an important conversation, and Stephen, if we can have the next slide up, mate, that would be wonderful. Effective listeners listen for understanding rather than listen to get their bit in. So if we're listening for understanding, we're asking ourselves, what's my intent in this conversation? What might make it a successful outcome for all concerned? And you've got to suspend judgment and listen fully. And taking time to think is something that Western society and pakeha are not good at doing in general. We rush to fill the silence the moment there's a gap with our own voice. Indigenous communities have always known, I've worked with many different cultures around the world, Indigenous communities have always known about the value of pause. When you stop and you pause, you offer the person you're talking to time to think, to process, and maybe to adjust their thinking and think that's not really what I meant at all. You also reclaim your time to think and process what's being said. It can take humans up to 9 seconds to process high-level thoughts. And how often is there 9 seconds in a pause? One of the practical strategies I've used to help me learn pausing, because it's not easy for me to do that, is to silently take a slow breath in and a slow breath out and internally count 1, 2, 3. And if you do it in a way where people don't notice, then you actually breathe again. Because sometimes when you're in a really important conversation, you get so het up, you forget to breathe. So it's a great breathing strategy as well. And then I think it was Rosie in our breakout group mentioned pausing. Pausing is, mentioned paraphrasing. I know, or it might have been Maria, but you talked about, and noticed in the chat room too, you talked about the value of paraphrasing. So in the past, when I was learning about paraphrasing, the common way to do it was very much about, oh, so what I hear you saying is, oh, what I'm thinking from what you're saying is, and the minute you do that, you're putting the focus back on I. The focus should be on the person you're talking to. That's why, so you're suggesting, you're concerned, your idea is, you're thinking, you're saying. Always use your, you are. Paraphrasing is also a great tool when you're working in a team and there are lots of ideas flying around. And if you're listening with intent to paraphrase, then picking up on the two key issues that are going around the table, we seem to be talking about two key issues, or there are two key things you're wanting here. That helps people synthesise and get their thinking organised and stop meandering everywhere. So it's a way of bringing organised thinking back to the table. And paraphrasing is your most powerful tool for dealing with conflict and resistance. Imagine a teacher who comes to you and says, these kids just can't learn. What do you expect with the homes they come from? Now, you could take the path of saying, well, it's part of your responsibility as a teacher, blah, 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 to work with these children, and we care for all children in our school. If you use what we call a reframing paraphrase, such as, so you're concerned about your children's learning. Notice the flip to a positive frame. Then you're in a position to say, because hopefully the person will say, well, yes, of course I'm concerned about their learning. They can't do this and they can't do that. So tell me what they can do and what you're wanting them to do, and let's figure out some ways to help them start to move there. Once you paraphrase, you've got somewhere to go rather than just coming in with a question or a fight and flight or a response that will cause fight and flight. Another example is someone who comes to you and says, I'm sick of our team meetings. They're an absolute waste of time. So you value meetings that are productive. See the flip? So paraphrasing is probably our most neglected listening tool. And when you're dealing with really, really hard issues with parents or adults in your team, in your school, paraphrasing is one of your most powerful tools, because if you come back with a fight or flight, it knots the hose and stops the flow. Paraphrasing keeps the flow going. And then, of course, in the chat, you picked up on the importance of inquiry. It's not just your inquiry words that are important, it's how you inquire. If you're sharing an edict that's come from somewhere or important information, you use what we call an authoritative or credible voice. This is what the ministry is charging us with doing, and these are the expected timelines. Notice it's a factual voice. If you're inquiring, your subtle use of an approachable voice can keep the mind open and thinking. So, Stephen, you're wanting to change your yard duty day? Notice how my voice inflects upwards just a little. And then, of course, the words you use are all important. Avoid like the plague. Sentence stems like do you, have you, will you, could you. Have you got any thoughts about? Well, a subtle message there is you might not, so I'll tell you some. If you say, what thoughts do you have about? And how might you put them into action? What and how are two of your most powerful stems, along with tell me more or I'm curious about. And then it's not about saying always, okay, what will we do? What will we do about this? This is a real issue. What will we do? The use of will is the language of commitment. It can close the mind down because it calls for certainty. So you're scrambling to find the right answer rather than potential solutions. When you use the language of might, how might, what might, I'm wondering, that opens up the mind and encourages more people to offer their thoughts. And the last one there is plurals. Instead of saying, well, what's the action we need to take? What are some actions we might think about? See the difference by using a plural rather than that action or that problem. And there's your fixed mind frame. Some again opens up the mind. So inquiry in terms of the words you use in your approach are intended to open thinking up. And of course, Stephen, thanks mate for the next one. These skills are situated within the larger picture of all important learning conversation skills. And I called them learning talk because although we are biologically designed to talk, we have to learn the skills to do so. And these are the capabilities and skills that are essential to important conversations. What I've learned, particularly when I was writing the Learning Talk books and Important Conversations at Work, which is book 5, is that you really can't test assumptions and check for evidence. You can't work for resolution. You can't use those more complex learning talk capabilities and skills unless you have the art of inquiry skills under your belt. And that's why Carolyn and Cheryl and I chose these as the focus for our conversation today, because if you can get those skills right, you're really on the road to being able to engage in important conversations. So, not only do we need to practice our own capabilities and skill. Oh, there's one more slide, Stephen, just before I go on to that, if you wouldn't mind, mate. I noticed in the chat that some of you are finding when you print it out from the link that Carolyn sent you to these, it's coming out very grainy. And I'm realising it's because they're being printed from the book. So what I will do at the end of this session is send you a clean copy. Send Carolyn a clean copy that she can then resend out. And this is a gift for you to take so that you've got some learning scaffolds you can draw on when you're working under these skills. My friend and colleague Ros Miller, who was principal of New Plymouth Primary School and now is working for Evaluation Associates, made hers as a mouse mat, so that when she's online talking, she can refer to these scaffolds in a really nice way, and maybe you can find some ways to use them too. So not only do we need to work on our own learning talk capabilities, one of the many roles we play as leaders is to build the capabilities of others. So our final role play offers some insights into this. And as we do so, there's an opportunity for you to observe and reflect using a couple of reflection scaffolds that will be in the chat for you. As Cheryl and I share, have a think about what do you think Principal Cheryl's goals were and what skills were evidenced that helped her to achieve this. Now, I'm still Joan and I'm still the team leader at Barringup Primary School. And I need to tell you, I'm so frustrated, I don't know what to do about it. I have a team member who's causing us a real issue. So I'm going off to see my principal, the esteemed Dr. Cheryl Doy, to get her to solve it for me, because after all, that's what she's paid the extra money for, isn't it? So let's see. Oh, Cheryl, I need to talk to you. Chris has been arriving 15 minutes late to almost all of our meetings this term. There's always an excuse. It's disrespectful to the rest of us because we never get through our agenda.
So how have you used the norms in your mates agreement to address that with him?
Well, I haven't. I thought you might have a word with him.
Joan, as a team leader, you have a responsibility to talk to Chris about this. What I will do is help you to work out how you might approach him. So maybe we can practice a little if that would help.
Well, it would, because actually I don't really know what to say.
So you mentioned that it's disrespectful of Chris to continually arrive late. So which norm might help you to address that with him?
Well, I'm thinking respect, because he's late always, and being on time is one of the actions under our norm of respect.
So how might you use the norm of respect to talk with him?
I hadn't thought of that. I think I could say something like, Chris, I notice you've arrived up to 15 minutes late to our past 4 meetings. Our mate's norm of respect actually includes being on time. So you need to be on time.
Yeah, the way you've connected Chris's lateness to the norm of showing respect by being on time really lets him know that there's a gap between what's happened and what's expected. That's a really helpful start to the conversation. Following that, I'm wondering if rather than simply telling him he needs to be on time, which might close the conversation down, you might open it up with a question so that you invite him, his thinking, something like, our mate's norm of respect includes being on time. So I'm wondering what's happening.
That's great, Cheryl. I think I've got the words now. Thank you.
Well, when we've been talking in our leadership team about invitational language and its impact, it's a great chance to practice. So let's catch up after your conversation with Chris and reflect on how your language influenced his outcome.
I'd really like that. I'll talk to him on Friday before our next Monday meeting, so he's got the weekend to think about it.
Great.
And I will too. Thank you.
Sounds good.
One of the things that came through from everyone is that this is a really common scenario. And the question posed to me just before we left was around, in order to, when I have these conversations, I just get this anxiety in the pit of my stomach. And they're conversations that are really hard to have. And yes, they are. And since I didn't get the chance to answer the question, I'm going to answer it now. And it's our responsibility as leaders to address issues in ways that always empower people as much as they can be, that deal with issues, particularly if they involve kids. You have to go the high moral ground. If this issue is about children, you have to address it. So the anxiety in the pit of the stomach and so on is part of why I'm saying, when you practice, there are 3 key things here that you need to do. Practice, 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 and grow yourself internally. I remember talking with Bob Garmston, one of my mentors, whom Cheryl knows, about how as a female, when I was a kid, I was conditioned to keep the peace, particularly back in the day. And, keep the harmony, keep the peace, don't raise issues that are uncomfortable. So I said to him that was how I'd been brought up. And I felt really uncomfortable addressing these important issues. And he looked me in the eye and he said, Joan, do you want to be comfortable or do you want to be effective? Your role as a leader is to be effective. And that's why practicing these skills and taping yourself and having an observer in your team meetings who's focusing on the skills, all for the point of growth, is so important. Stephen, if we could just see that next slide, it shows a leadership continuum that goes from being more directive to being collaborative to being empowering or entrusting responsibility. Now, in that situation, Cheryl wasn't simply, Cheryl gave as much support as was needed. She saw when Joan needed some direction and moved more to the directive. You know, I'm wondering how, she still used invitational language. I'm wondering how it would be if you said this. So as leaders, you've got to know the adult learners you work with as deeply and as well as you expect them to know the student learners they teach. And when you understand and know them, then you're in a position to move anywhere along that continuum. There are some people you work with who you can say, what's your goal? Okay, off you go and do it, because you know they have the capabilities to do it. Other people you'll work in partnership with, let's work on this together, see how far we go, subdivide responsibility, always looking to empower. There are some people, adults you work with though, who need a more structured directive approach. And for some of the people you work with, a small step is actually a big step. So you not only need those inquiry skills to find out what's happening and where they're coming from, you need to use your advocacy skills as well. This is what I think we need to do because, or this is what we might do because, depending on the people and the situation. So keeping that continuum in mind when you're addressing important issues is really key. And in the second slide, thanks, Stephen, you'll notice that we modelled in that role play 3 steps that really give you some practical support for approaching an accountability conversation. There's no point in developing any sort of agreement in your school unless you use those agreements to make them work for you. So I, as the team leader, was able to say, with Cheryl's help, Chris, I notice you've arrived up to 15 minutes late to our past 4 meetings. Our mate's norm of respect includes being on time. So I'm wondering what's been happening. Notice what's happening. There's no emotion involved. I'm not saying I'm really worried or I'm really angry, I'm really concerned. Objective, calm voice. You've gathered the facts, you've got the data that shows he's been late to 4 meetings. So when you share that, there's no emotion. You simply share what you saw and heard and what actually happened. You describe the gap between the agreement or what was expected and what was observed. There's no accusation or assumptions or conclusions. It's simply stating the facts. And then you end with a question that makes it safe for the person to respond. If we can have the next example, it just offers another practical way of using them. Tony, in our meeting today, I heard you say to Erica that her idea was ridiculous. Our team agreement states we disagree respectfully. So I'm curious about what was going through your mind there when you said that. Notice again the facts and then some inquiry language. So that's not the conversation. What it does, though, is show you an entry point into how to enter a conversation where then, when Chris or Tony or whoever else responds, you're using your listening, your pausing, your paraphrasing and your inquiry to uncover what happens. So in this short session today, Carolyn and Cheryl and I decided to focus on art of inquiry because it underpins all the important conversations you'll ever have. Unless you're directing someone to leave the school immediately for, obvious reasons, but the most important conversations you have, those skills are really important. And I hope it's been useful and practical.
Thank you. So first of all, it's my great privilege to, on behalf of all of us, Joan, to say thank you so much for your mahi this afternoon. I first started, not that I'm old, but I first started working with Joan in the early 90s, and she has been an enormous impact on my career, and I know I wouldn't be who I am today without the work that you and David and the stuff that you put into my life. And so just on behalf of all of us, I'd like to say thank you so much for taking us through these conversations today, just to give us all those practices. So can we show Joan our appreciation in our usual manner by the tapping or the waving, or you can use your little thing on Zoom. And I'd also like to do a really big plug for Joan's new book, Learning Culture for Learning Impact. Joan sent me a copy fairly early on, and it landed in my handbag for my first trip, and it's been there ever since. So every single school that I work in now, this is sitting on the desk, because it's jam-packed full of just utter goodness that you need to get your hands on. So it's really gorgeous. I've actually had one school saw I was starting to read the cover and actually covered it for me for free, which was really lovely. So do get it. It's an amazing resource. And yeah, so thank you so much.